Can we talk a bit about the nuclear program?
Yes, nuclear weapons, nuclear devices, nuclear warheads, nuclear technology, nuclear project, half-baked nuclear weapons acquisition program. And now I changed my mind, denuclearization. And you will say, wow, maybe things change. Lesson 1, going nuclear. Lesson 2, go nuclear. I would be very happy to say I was one of these wise people, but I was not. God created countries big and small. Dr. Oppenheimer created nuclear weapons to make countries equal.
Couple of words on formats. Our esteemed experts are going to do an interview for 45 minutes, after which we will open the floor to Q&A, and it will last for another 45 minutes. Please join me in welcoming our experts.
Yeah, thank you very much for the very kind introduction and for having us here. And we are really happy to have Andrei Lankov. I also did a summer school in Kaliningrad at the American University in 2004. Mm-hmm. So we have kind of this link which connects us. And your book was gifted to me by Peter Rotland, a member of my committee during the PhD in 2013. I have it back in my office. So let's just jump right into our discussion. Let's start a bit with the discussion of the political economy of North Korea itself. So North Korea, after the fall of the Soviet Union, got into a lot of difficulties because they were kind of financially supported by the Soviet Union. And, yes. and this coincided with a range of additional problems. There was a couple of harvests that didn't work well, and North Korea suffered from a strong famine in the 1990s, mm-hmm. which almost managed to kind of bring the regime into big difficulties. And so if you look at North Korea today, 20 years later, how has North Korea evolved? Has it managed to stabilize its system politically? And where are we today?
Well, basically, I would say they are quite stable. And they delivered a miracle of survival. Very few people expected. I would be very happy to say I was one of these wise people, but I was not. Actually, I can name these wise people, not widely known to the public, but 90% believe that they were doomed. And now we can say they have survived. How? Actually, I would say we should distinguish between 3 stages. It's a bit of simplification. That is, first, it's spontaneous marketization, which began actually around 1990, even before the crisis reached its height. That is, essentially North Koreans discovered market economy and created it from the scratch. Because North Korea of the 60s and 70s was the most, I would say, non-market society worldwide. Have I had time? I would give you a lot of examples, but basically market and market relations were almost non-existent in North Korea from 1960 to 1985. And Kim Il-sung himself said a number of times that we should keep rationing system because rationing is social justice. It's good. Rich and poor are equal. It's a brilliant system. We should keep it. Everything should be rationed. And indeed, everything from socks to eggs was rationed. And ration ceased to be delivered. And people began to do business. Farmers began to do illegal lots at the mountains, and the government was perfectly aware, but they did not do much about it. A lot of people went through essentially unprotected border to China as migrant workers. At maximum, up to 200,000 North Koreans were working in China in around 1999 as illegal migrants. They were bringing money. Then people began to create private companies, private mines even, private factories, usually disguised as government factories. Essentially, they bought licenses from the state to run a factory or a mine, which on paper remained a government property. In practice, it was privately owned. It was kind of spontaneous period. Then, between 2012 and 2019, Kim Jong-un government, there was an early experiment too. I have to very simplify everything. The North Korean government did try to encourage such developments by emulating Chinese reforms, but without political components. Chinese reforms are usually described as policy of reform and openness. In North Korea, we had a policy of reforms without openness. Policy-wise, no relaxation. If anything, Kim Jong-un was tougher on the political control than his father. But in economy, he began to encourage such changes, dramatically increased the autonomy of the state-owned enterprises, essentially like China in the late 1980s, using the same schemes I have no time to talk about. For those who are interested, who know it's double price, or in China it was called double track planning system and so on. Borrowed from China. They studied Chinese experience very in great detail, but no political relaxation. And then 2017-19, the UN Security Council introduced sanctions which made impossible this emulation of the Chinese model. So they made a couple of steps back, but they were very lucky because China-US rivalry basically resulted in Chinese decision to maintain them, to keep them afloat as a vital buffer zone, no matter what. And then they won a lottery of the Ukrainian war. So first they got pension, or if you like, universal basic income, with China being their social welfare department. And then they won Russian lottery, and now they are doing reasonably well. Economy is growing because they are digesting money earned by selling ammunition and everything to Russia. And probably they will waste a significant part of this money, but for the time being, everything is improving. And visually, say, foreign diplomats, and there are very few diplomats because most of foreign embassies were closed, and they kicked out pretty much all foreigners out of the country over the last 5-6 years. Very few are there. But they say that, only in the last year or so, number of private cars, they have different registration plates, increased maybe by 30 to 50%.
This also sounds very interesting. Also, I already have a couple of questions to follow up. Probably the first question is, why didn't North Korea follow the Chinese path? I mean, you said they were reforming the economy, but they weren't opening up.
Because they are not suicidal.
So what would have been the consequence of opening up?
Because where is South China? Political reforms in China were possible because South China does not exist. The island of Taiwan is way too small to make any difference. I can assure you. Has the Republic of China, yes, I mean Zhonghua Minguo, that is Taiwan, had they controlled not this tiny irrelevant island, but entire China south of Yangtze, and had they have the difference in per capita income, like the difference between North and South Korea, ratio is 1 to 25. And it's not the imperialist propaganda. It's official North Korean estimates. Because they don't publish it domestically, they provide this estimate to foreign agencies. 1 to 25. By far, in per capita GDP, by far the highest difference between two countries which share land border. Had China been such a country place, probably in northern China, Chinese People's Republic, a rich people would be a person who could afford an old motorbike. So the logic is, if they do opening, the common people will learn how much they are lagging behind South Korea. And South Korea is their natural benchmark. In China, it's not a problem. People say, well, Chinese are aware that they're living not as good as Japanese, but it's not a big problem. It's not a problem in China because Japan or United States or United Kingdom are different countries. Their success is irrelevant. You can always say it's because the Brits were such terrible imperialists, almost as bad as Japan. End of story. Is why they are rich. And we are moral and blah, blah, blah. And all this story, what happened in this Jungar was just a evil talk. Anyway, in China, you can say so. But But if you cannot say it in North Korea. Historically, South Korea was agricultural backwater. And North Korea was the most advanced area.
All the industry was in North Korea.
All industry was in North Korea. It was the most advanced part of East Asia outside Japan in 1945. And how can you explain it if people learn about it? And if they get the measure of freedom and access to foreign information similar to that of the Chinese? And it's only part of the story. Usually, people, elite, if there is a revolution, don't believe the story that a revolution means a total replacement of elite. Very rarely. Only the upper crust is removed. Ministers suffer. Second, deputies of the department, deputy heads of department and bureaus are doing very well, even after revolution. They have social capital, they have connections, they have experience. Look, you know, who is running all post-Soviet state? Not only quote-unquote bad Russia, but quote-unquote bad, good Baltic states. Same old Soviet officials or their children or close relatives. And it's normal. I believe a significant part of the audience are Russian. Correct. So I just recently learned a couple of days ago, everybody knows Konstantin Simonov, a great poet and a great literary official of Stalin era, an embodiment of everything which was good and bad in the Soviet literature. You know what was the maiden name of his mother? Obolenskaya. Not a coincidence. The Obolenskaya. Rurikevich. Yes, this revolutionary poet was not exactly of the working class origin. For those who are not of Russian origin, well, it's like somebody in post-revolutionary UK, socialist communist UK, whose actually mother was a direct line descendant of somebody who was fighting at Hastings with William the Conqueror. So, and not as a common soldier. So anyway, so in North Korea, it's not going to happen. The elite is doomed. They have no escape route. Because if system collapses, their experience, their social capital will collapse too.
Let me follow up on the point of information, because it's already like 10, 15 years ago, there were all of these stories of people getting information about South Korea,
Yes.
USB keys across the border. Because of marketization, we have this kind of connections to the outside world, and all of a sudden the informational isolation isn't there anymore. So don't North Koreans actually know what South Korea is about?
Young urban North Koreans know. Young urban North Koreans. And good and bad news, the higher you are in the pecking order, the more likely you have a better picture. But the higher you are, the less reasons to fight the system you have. Because normally, low level of elite is usually the area, the social group, where revolutions start. They want replacement, they have social capital, everything. And it's not going to happen in North Korea because they are all in the same boat. But having said that, yes, they are aware. They underestimate the difference, but it's telling that even now, North Korean government tries to not to talk much about South Korea. Just one example. Don't see their major newspaper. Until 2010 or 2011, they had entire page. Normally they have 6 pages. They used to have entire page dedicated to South Korea only, about how bad, terrible it was. Yes, it is. You know, drunk American soldiers shooting for support South Koreans for fun, people who dream, who secretly put portraits of the Kim family members in their studies and, you know, everything. But in 2011, they fused this department with the international section. So they had one page for international and South Korean news. Gradually, South Korean news completely disappeared from this section, and the section was reduced from one page to half page. And looks very comical, by the way, now, because they all report only bad news, randomly selected. A volcano eruption in Papua New Guinea, earthquake in Chile, Tourist bus collapsing falling from a bridge in Nigeria is the mainstream news. Plus, occasionally, something about struggle against the evil imperialists.
Yeah. This is very interesting. So what we have is basically, we have an elite that is co-opted. And for this elite, it's more interesting to remain within North Korea because they could never reach the same position outside of North Korea.
They will lose everything.
Yeah, there are stories which I've read in newspapers and somewhere that if they go to South Korea, they might become taxi drivers. And some of these stories went back to North Korea. In North Korea, they had their own driver, they had their own car, they had a nice, comparatively nice apartment, and you have positions of power. So you want to remain in the system. And so this is the elite that is interested in keeping the status quo.
And even worse, they're afraid that they will be lynched or made scapegoats for their real or alleged crimes.
So you could basically argue that North Korea today is much more resilient, much more stable than it was 25 years ago.
Yes, I believe there were two major turns. First, in 2012, when Kim Jong-un decided to embrace the changes. His father was oscillating. And you can tell, actually, Columbia University Press is going to publish a book I have just finished, submitted tonight by my co-author Peter Ward. They have accepted, submitted the final with all this last revisions. And it will be exactly about these oscillations. So I will not go into details, but Kim Jong-un did not really know what to do about markets. Kim Jong-un was ready to embrace. It was the first step. Then, when this market-oriented policy became impossible due to the UN Security Council intervention, he had two strikes of great luck. First, US-Chinese rivalry. Now China, which has historically been very ambivalent approach to North Korea, has vested interest in keeping North Korea afloat. And during the COVID, North Korea did not get into a new famine because China was shipping 3F, fertilizer, food, fuel. And now they have this Ukrainian money. And the recent study 2 weeks ago about the level of light emission in North Korea indicated a significant increase in light emission if I remember, increased by 28% starting from October 22. And it's largely concentrated in the cities where the military industrial centers are, and some cities related to trade with China.
This is kind of an interesting connection to the next block of questions that we have to the geopolitical position of North Korea. And so how would you characterize this? Are they playing like a very pretty intelligent and smart game in waiting? They have China, they have Russia, they have the United States. So these kind of big actors, and North Korea is a very small country, but they're playing a pretty intelligent game. And
absolutely, they are brilliant.
Yeah,
the world's best diplomats. You know, just a bit of self-aggrandizement and boasting. And funny story. In 2018, you can check YouTube, search, it will confirm what I'm going to say. Just before the first US-North Korea meeting, summit in Singapore in June 2018, I was interviewed by Bloomberg, and it was published, my interview, pretty short, by Bloomberg under the title, "The North Koreans will outsmart Donald Trump, as always." As always, as my edition was not the original time. I did say it in the interview, they didn't put it on the title. But back then, it produced an intense reaction from the Trump admirers who said this Russian propagandists use Putin agents, or this stupid liberal, or this, admirer of Hillary Clinton, everybody doesn't understand the greatness, blah, 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 blah. Well, but they did outsmart him. Exactly in the ways. And I'm not saying that, well, if you are watching this country for decades, you see, because they're just using the same tricks very frequently. The problem is that democracies, they have replacement of their decision makers. So they keep getting into the same traps. Having said that, talking about it, of course, they are very very independent. I wouldn't see them a kind of, football being kicked by big players. If everything, they are a very smart force running on the football field, being basically benefiting from everybody. Their worldview is simple. They believe that they don't believe in any ideology. I like to talk to the North Korean officials because they are very pragmatic, very Machiavellian ideology, and completely non-ideological. If they have any ideology, traces of ideology, I would say, they really want their country to be independent. Sometimes, to increase their autonomy in the system, they do something which is sort of irrational. Otherwise, it's some kind of how we describe ideology. It's something which has value, and you do something just to fit into your system of values, even if it's damaging your interests. It's the only value I can see with these people is they really value their autonomy and independence. Uri siksahvijui, uri sigorosalja. Those who speak Korean understand what I mean. Therefore, it's important. Otherwise, they are very pragmatic, and they know how to play games. They know how to play Chinese, how to play Russians, how to play Americans, and they are damn good in playing South Koreans.
So the full-scale invasion of Ukraine was a kind of, again, a big, an additional advantage in their game, because
it's the biggest advantage now.
To also use Russia.
Yeah. A poor pensioner won lottery, of course. Good news.
Can we talk a bit about the nuclear program? So what is kind of the role of North Korea's nuclear program? Is this a bargaining chip that they use in this geopolitical game? Or is it more like a real deterrent that they need in order to be safe from invasion? Or is it more like for the domestic population?
All the above. All the above. I think when they started their advance to the nuclear weapons, and the basic decisions were made, give or take, in 1958, 1959, when they began to build up their nuclear weapons acquisition program. It took half a century to get to the first semi-successful nuclear test, but they never stopped. And their program had exactly the reasons you have mentioned. The relative value of every single reason has changed. Sometimes it was a negotiating chip to squeeze money and aid for the foreign audience. Sometimes it was almost exclusively for deterrence. Sometimes it was a useful propaganda tool. Recently, what worries me a lot, it's becoming, they are again dreaming about conquest of South Korea. Again. It's becoming a tool for a possible, not only for defense, but possible offensive actions against South Korea. I can go into detail. But yes, short answer is all the above. But even though relative value of all items in this list has changed, has been changing, the major item normally was deterrence. They saw what happened in Libya, Iraq, Afghanistan, Ukraine, Georgia. Should I continue? They remember Libya was the best example. In 2003, Gaddafi surrendered his half-baked nuclear weapons acquisition program. Ambassador Bolton, who was responsible for dealing with Libya and later was dealing with North Korea, he used to say a number of times that North Koreans should learn the lesson of Libya. Thank you very much. It's exactly what they learned. Because when the revolution began, the Western countries introduced no-fly zones. And it was probably the decisive factor in the outcome of a short civil war in Libya. Well, it was much longer, but for Gaddafi it was short. Without Western invasion, he probably would win. He was killed. And for your information, he had 7 children, of whom three he had more children. He had 7 sons, of whom 3 sons were killed during the revolution. 3 more spent up to 10 years in jail. And I can assure you a jail in the Near East is a very unpleasant place. When you see it, how would you see it from the North Korean point of view? He was a fool who believed the security guarantee, the sweet American promises, and he got killed, and his family was also largely decimated. Well, half of his family was killed. Why? Because he was a naive guy, believing the Western promises. And of course, in spite of their positioning, they are perfectly aware about the sorry state of the Budapest Protocol. Yeah. So their logic is simple. We should not trust any country. Nuclear weapons is the only guarantee of our security. And this is why denuclearization has been always been a pipe dream.
One point that I found interesting here as well is you described North Korean leadership as very pragmatic. And
Yes.
But at the same time, there seem to be ideas that they might want to re-attack at a certain point South Korea, which doesn't really...
Sweet dream. I will quote a prominent Russian diplomat, without naming name, of course. He said exactly about this. He said, then poetically, in humid and warm nights in Korea's summer, they dream about it, dream about completing the unfinished business of 1950. But then, in the sober light of the morning, they go back to the practical matters. So, yes, ideology is not completely... Personally, I believe it's not going to happen. But have I been responsible for the South Korean defense? I would not take risks. It's a low probability, high risk scenario.
Which kind of brings us to the last big topic that we want to discuss. Because Russia as well was described for many, many years as a country governed by an elite that is very pragmatic, that basically wants to stay in power and fill their pockets. And then in 2022, all of a sudden...
then they got great ideas.
Then we had the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And then what happened is that many people kind of looked at Russia and saw the sanctions, like Russia becoming economically much more isolated worldwide. Then very dependent on China. Russia's selling its oil and gas to China, and China is basically selling everything else to Russia. And at the same time, the political environment in Russia got much harsher, much more repressive.
Yes, no problem.
And so people made the comparison with North Korea. Does Russia look increasingly like North Korea? Is it probably the future? Is North Korea Russia's future? So I wanted to ask you, to what extent do you think this kind of comparison makes sense?
Doesn't. But first of all, about Russia, I would like to emphasize something. Russian economy now has some problems. I mean, now this year, starting from the last year. But you sort of said that economically Russia was isolated. Yes, but it was doing very well. During my trips to Russia, I'm sort of surprised how kind of prosperous, developed, sophisticated everything looks, at least in Moscow and Petersburg. Usually I have no time to go to any other place. Having said that, it's just a side remark. Yes, dependency on China, yes. Switch to more authoritarian government, definitely yes. Having said that, why North Korea, Russia is not going to become North Korea? First, it's a very nice turn of speech to say, we are almost as bad as North Korea. For your information, North Korea is a country where people, with the exception of people with high level security clearance, has no access to internet. It's a country where, in theory, in order to go outside your province of registration, you have to apply for a police permit. It's a country where you can stay after 10 p.m. in somebody else's house, even if it's across the street, only if you report the government about it. It's a country where any kind of political discussion, I mean literally any kind, can easily get you killed. And I don't see Russia or even China becoming something like that. Why? We should not forget the origin of North Korea. The North Korean state is a result of an authentic popular revolution. It was a movement of the North Korean farmers who had an opportunity to build the society the generation of farmers used to dream about, especially, I mean, pre-modern farmers, pre-industrial farmers, highly egalitarian, highly repressive, and very, very just in their understanding. You know what? I recently discovered a wonderful text I used to study as an undergraduate and completely forgot about its existence. The law is called the Land Law of the Heavenly Kingdom. Taiping movement in China, a great peasant revolt in China in the 1850s. And these people managed to control roughly 1/3 of the Chinese empire. And unlike most traditional peasants, they had opportunity and skills to write down their dreams. And in great detail, it was a document about an ideal society as dreamed by the traditional peasantry. Looks like cross between North Korea under Kim Il-sung and Cambodia under Pol Pot. Read this document. You will enjoy it. And again, it was not a kind of anti-utopia. It was utopia. It was a dream. These rebels wanted to make into real life. And this was an authentic revolution. People who ended like that, they were driven by real popular revolution enthusiasm first, and then they found themselves prisoners of their own partial success and partial fail. And they have no escape route. The Russian business elite. So these people have escape. They have escape. And their level of commitment is completely different. And the level of support is completely different. And the ideas of perfect society are completely different.
This is very interesting, because I can see that Russia is moving continuously into a more repressive direction. But
Yes.
you would argue that it's the foundation of the national idea in a way that is very different from Russia today under Putin.
Too urban, too individualistic, too sophisticated, too well-educated, too modernized.
But what I always found fascinating about North Korea is that they were able to create a very distinct national culture in the sense also of the plays, the music, the performances. It's really something unique to North Korea. And I think is something which is kind of also appreciated by people who live in North Korea.
Yes and no. My wife, who spent last 40 years writing and studying, not so much writing, but a lot of studying North Korean culture, she believes in the case. I'm a bit skeptical, sometimes argue about it. But I think that once they are given an opportunity, they don't want to watch it. But as my wife says, Tatiana Gabrusenko, as she says, even if they believe they don't like it, they're still shaped by it.
Yeah, shaped by some 12 years ago, I was like for 1 week in North Korea with these tourist tours from Beijing, and then kind of the impression that we had it when people, if you the whole life you're shaped by this kind of music, by the same songs, by the stuff that you see on TV. When there were when there's songs in the streets, people were singing these songs, and obviously you're kind of shaped by this whole stuff, and
Yes.
In a much stronger sense than you often think. And this might also create, I mean, if there's ever a reunification or something, there are huge social consequences. Or
I don't see unification happening anyway. No, well, there are some low probability scenario, but let's forget two words, which are pure propaganda: unification and denuclearization. Both are pipe dreams, completely unrelated to the sad reality we live in. And it's not going to happen. North Korea will remain nuclear as long as the Kim family is in power, or maybe much longer. And unification, well, if we have a revolution in North Korea, which is not impossible, but highly unlikely, especially now, because if we have an outbreak of instability, China first will try to basically draw yes, in aid and money. And if it doesn't help, they probably can even send troops, Chinese, because they cannot afford a revolution in North Korea. So I would say as long as the United States and China are in confrontation, which is probably for decades, China will treat North Korea as a buffer zone. And even though relations between two countries are bad, if there is a crisis in North Korea, China will be involved. And North Korean government, North Korean political elite, these people don't like China. They despise China. But if there is a crisis, they will be running to Chinese uncle begging for help, and they will get it.
So before we open up the floor for questions, it would be basically the last question that we have prepared for our discussion. So your prediction for the future, for the next 5, 10, 15 years, would basically be that North Korea remains pretty stable in the way that it works today?
I think they are on a stability plateau after very dangerous times when they could collapse. And it was a bit of luck that nobody outside was really serious about promoting some kind of revolutionary change within North Korea, because they were very vulnerable. But it's over. They are not vulnerable anymore. They are stable, and they are likely to remain in control for a long period of time. My prediction, more of the same. If they negotiate with the Americans partial relaxation of the UN Security Council sanctions, which is possible, not likely, but possible, it means they will probably restart this reforms without openness policy, which is now on hold. Because in order to continue this policy, they have to have access to the foreign market. Now they essentially banned from selling anything of value. If they get it, if they get relaxation of sanctions, it means they will be able to trade, and they will go back to what they were doing between 2012 and 2018. It's the only significant possibility of change, but it's not about denuclearization or any kind of geopolitical shifts. It's just the economy will revive, they will become less dependent on China, Russia, or whoever else, they will start earning their own money, and they will probably start provoking China and Russia occasionally, just out of fun. But they sometimes do it. I'm pretty sure that sometimes do it out of pure fun. Having said that, generally I think they will stay quite stable. Not least another part which was not mentioned. Their opponents worldwide are losing interest in bringing them down. They have never been terribly interested in that, and now they are probably positively afraid of it. So if you didn't notice, Americans stop Korean language broadcast. They don't do Voice of America, Radio Free Asia. They don't broadcast to North Korea. South Koreans did same recently, a few months ago.
Thank you, Andrei. This is all really interesting. So now let's open up the floor for questions. So who wants to ask the first question to Andrei Lankov?
Thank you very much for the talk. I really learnt a lot from it. I just wanted to ask about succession in the Kim dynasty. A lot of the recent reporting seems to focus on Kim Jong-un's daughter, whereas earlier speculation was more about his sister. So I was wondering how sustainable that succession system really is in practice, and if something were to happen to Kim Jong-un in the next few years, whether a transition like that could realistically hold.
So let's start from, first of all, let's have facts straight. What you said is actually correct, even though it looks factually incorrect. Why? Last week, the National Intelligence Service, NIS, had their regular pseudo-secret briefing to the members of the South Korean parliament, where they said they expected a daughter known as Kim Joo-e, we are not certain whether it's her real name, the daughter to be officially promoted as a successor on the party congress, which began 2 days ago. It initially attracted much attention, but there was nothing new about it, because talks about Kim Joo-e as a successor began in 2022. And a lot of people, including yours truly, have written about it. And I was quite noisy on this issue, largely in Korean, but also in Russian and English too. and not only me, Johnson, some others. But personally, I have no idea why they said that she is going to be promoted. I believe she would be shown at Congress, but she is still a bit young to be officially designated as a successor. It's likely to happen on the next Congress, but she is promoted. She has been in the Central TV 600 times, starting from late 2020. She has a special title, actually a lot of titles. Most remarkable is Handoivi de Hanbun, the great person who is a guide, a lodestar. Sister has never had been promoted as a successor. She was seen as a potential successor in case of Kim Jong-un's sudden death. But officially, she is not even the departmental head of the Central Committee. She is a deputy head of a department in the Central Committee. It was widely believed, yes. And personally, I think that it was a well-founded. So essentially, you are right. But never, ever a single official open decision about your promotion. What will happen if Kim Jong-un, who has health problems, die in 5 to 10 years? I would say it's the only black swan which can land in Pyongyang. The only black swan. Because if it happens, there will be a great deal of power fighting for power. And personally, I believe that his sister, Kim Yo-jong, is much better positioned to become the next Kim than this young girl. And I believe if it happens, the fate of this young girl is going to be very, very sorry. Fate. You know what I mean. But or if he lives for more than, I would say, 10 years, of course, Kim Jong-il, if it's your real name, but nothing surprising. When promotion of Kim Jong-un himself began, we did not know his exact spelling of his name. It was misspelled. When promotion of Kim Jong-il began, he was also, like now this girl, he also was named. They used this kind of flowery titles, but they never called his name. So I would say it's a window of vulnerability for the North Korean government. The most likely black swan event is a sudden death of Kim Jong-un before his daughter is old enough to become a leader, which means another 10 years. So if he is basically capable of running the country another 10 years, well, we are going to have Kim the Fourth, Her Majesty.
Thanks for your really insightful analysis. I have a question about the nuclear program. What lessons should we draw from North Korea's success in developing nuclear weapons? We saw Trump's personal diplomacy go nowhere, and you also mentioned Libya. Looking at Iran as well, why has North Korea succeeded in securing its regime through nuclear development while Middle Eastern states in comparable situations have not?
Yes, talking about nuclear stuff. By the way, there was a much less noisy, but still exchange of love letters between Mr. Something happened to my mic. I have to take, you remember my use when I was, usually mic did not exist. So once it's fixed. We had to, basically there was an exchange of love letters quite recently in 2000, last year actually. But there is a massive difference between Iran and Libya on one hand and North Korea on us. North Korea has deployable and actually deployed nuclear weapons. It has ICBM probably capable of hitting American cities, and definitely has ICBMs capable of hitting Guam and Saipan and Alaska. Which means that Americans will not dare. Too risky, too late. They could do it, have they wanted, 15 years ago. Even 10 years ago, it was too late. The North Koreans have between 50 to 80 nuclear devices ready to be used. And you don't touch a country which has 50 to 80 nuclear warheads. Why the Middle Eastern countries did not succeed? Because they were hectic, not persistent enough. North Koreans made a decision. The North Korean, actually Kim Il-sung, made a decision to go nuclear around 1958. He was working on this issue for decades. Can you find me any country in the Middle East which can consistently dedicate a significant part of its budget to the nuclear project for decades, train sufficient number of scientists and engineers, keeping them in the relative isolation from the international community? Make sure that responsible officials and generals will not steal too much from the funds dedicated to the program. Can you name me any country in the Middle East which is physically capable of doing it? I don't think you do.
Maybe we also had Israel, which...
What?
Israel?
Or the other might be.
Israel, well, is it in the Middle East? Geographically, yes. Culturally? But
No, in a sense that Israel might have attacked Iran or...
Yeah, no, because Israel is a country which can do it.
Yeah.
But it's probably the only country in the geographic, not cultural Middle East which can do it. I would say any country which has potential trouble with a great power neighbor, be it Russia, United States, China, UK, France, name it, should seriously think about going nuclear. Lesson 1. Lesson 2. You should be ready to dedicate, to go to play a long game and to work on your nuclear program in utmost secrecy. Ask Israelis how it can be done for a long time. And once you have it, you will be secure. The only security, the only way to ensure security of your country or your regime is to go nuclear, especially in the new world which arrived 4, 5, or 6 years ago. So it's a major lesson. Go nuclear. Be persistent, be secretive, and remember that it's about survival of your political survival as rulers of this country, and in some countries, survival of the country itself.
What I meant with the Israeli example is that Iran has basically Israel that was ready to intervene and to bomb Iranian facilities. We don't really have a player like Israel in...
Japan, South Korea can maybe, in some cases, they can try to do something like that. But once again, they don't. But again, they don't touch. Because North Korea is a hedgehog already. All foxes, all wolves don't need to worry.
Given growing doubts about U.S. security commitments under Trump, especially toward allies like South Korea and Japan, could North Korea see this as an opportunity to escalate tensions through further missile launches and military provocation?
Maybe yes, but I don't see much gains from their point of view from these provocations. Because they don't need to keep a high level of tension. What might be a temptation for them, if they successfully develop tactical nukes, tactical nuclear weapons, low-yield nuclear weapons, which can be used on the battlefield. Because what they have now, their current nuclear warheads are way too powerful to be used in a real battle. But they can have low-yield tactical nukes. It will allow them to neutralize a significant superiority of the South Korean military in the conventional weaponry. And they can dream about conquest of the South. Maybe not to unify with South Korea, but to subdue it, to make it a super Hong Kong, super Finlandization. It's a dream, as I have said. If you ask me about probability, I would say maybe 5-10% over the next 20 years, 30 years. Low probability. But for South Korea, it's a high risk. And it's not surprising that South Koreans are now seriously thinking about going nuclear. And my advice is, in the modern world, if nation security is again an issue. We are back in the world where a country can be invaded. I mean, seriously invaded with the disastrous results. For decades, it was largely a propaganda, especially popular among the right, but not only among the right. Now it's a new reality again. And it means go nuclear. God created countries big and small, and people big and small. Colonel Colt created his six-shooter to make people equal. And Dr. Oppenheimer created nuclear weapons to make countries equal.
In today's world, power is shaped not only by nuclear weapons, but also by AI, data and computing infrastructure. We have also heard about North Korea's success in cyber operations. How does North Korea view this new technological domain as a source of power?
There are major problem. First, I will make a slightly skeptical remark. You are probably right, but it's too early to say. Because AI is just how old? 2 years? 3 years? Yeah, too early to say. We are at the beginning of a massive transformation, and I would not dare to predict what will be really important. You might be right, but I would be a bit more careful. Having said that, with AI, currently, North Korea is not going to succeed. Why? Computing capacity. They have limited computing capacity, is damn expensive, and requires a lot of electricity, yes. And they cannot even provide electricity to make sure that the average person in the countryside would buy a refrigerator. So they have good hackers, but in terms of AI capacity, in the foreseeable future, they are not going to become a player. Going to switch to the hackers, seems hacking is their important source of hard currency. However, I would like to attract attention to something which is overlooked by the journalists writing their sensationalist reports. We get reports like, wow, North Koreans attack a Vietnamese crypto exchange and stole $500 million. Oh, it's how much of this money, I have a question, how much of this money did they really cash? It's a bit like you are taking a bank, move half ton of $100 bills, dropping nearly all of them in the lobby. Their major problem is they are good in hacking, but they don't know how to make it into real crusty money. Removing money from this account is good. And then what? Most of the stuff they steal, quote unquote, is recovered very soon. They managed to steal, they really managed to cash something, but it's a small portion of what they really steal. Plus, they are quite successful in hacking computers as a part of their intelligence operations. It's normal they're doing. When I'm not attacked for more than a couple of months, I began to worry about my efficiency. Maybe they are losing interest. And when everybody around is attacked, I'm not. Well, it's basically inferiority complex. I'm getting attacks every for 15 years, every, let's say, 2 or 3 months. And you know what's bad? They are getting better. Technology-wise, they have always been very good, but there was a giveaway until recently. It's about AI. Until recently, they could not write a proper letter in English or Korean or Russian. They found one way around, I will not tell which way, but when they tried to pretend to be a Russian or English or Korean speaker, they made funny mistakes. You say, how Korean? Well, it's a way how you structure a letter. It smells. Much less so now. AI. So now there are having few cases when they almost got through. Even though my computer is stuffed with all kinds of security devices and some special, quite seriously professional programs to counter such attacks.
Given that ordinary North Koreans have almost no access to the internet, how has the regime still managed to develop such advanced cyber capabilities and train people for this new security environment?
You get smart people with a right type of brain, and you put them in a special environment where these people get real training. They have schools, say Pyongyang University of Science and Technology, PUS. They have some other schools where people are trained to do serious study of computing. In these places, they have internet access because they are trusted. So people who are trusted, they select people to be trained as hackers, and these people have internet access. As a matter of fact, the military-industrial complex engineers have internet access. Funny enough, the leading economists have internet success. Their top policy analysts have internet success. But such people is a tiny fraction of population.
Hey, thanks for the talk. I have a follow-up question. How does North Korea recruit and train people in fields like marketing, engineering, and economics?
In the 1990s, there was a very interesting policy shift, which was not much noticed at that time. Some observers did notice. Unfortunately, I was not one of them. I didn't pay attention, and I was wrong. Some smart colleagues did. Kim Jong-il made a decision about ignoring the family background in case of people who were very good for STEM subjects, especially STEM subjects of great military significance. So if you were a smart boy in the countryside, whose great-grandfather once had a part of his land confiscated in 1946, you would be a descendant of a landlord, which would, until this decision, make it impossible for you to enter any good university, to live in any large city, and to do any meaningful career in the state or party bureaucracy. And then, bam, if you are good in calculus, you had chances, and really good chances. And these people flooded to technical schools in the 1990s, and some people say that the massive breakthrough in the missile and, well, somewhat less impressive, but still impressive breakthrough in the nuclear technology around 2010 was a result of this decision. People who entered colleges in 1994 began to really get things done in 2010. And in 2013, after 15 years of continuous failure, the first missile, the first satellite, reconnaissance, of course, satellite, was put on the orbit. And in 2017, again, after many years of unsuccessful efforts, the first ICBM, intercontinental ballistic missile, was successfully tested. And thermonuclear device, H-bomb, 2017 September. And we don't know names. Maybe some people in MI5 or CIA or elsewhere are aware. I'm not. And I'm not sure whether they are aware too. Might be. I'm not sure. But in due time, I don't think I will live long enough, but maybe some people here, we will probably learn that this major breakthrough was done by these young engineers for whom it was the only way of the social promotion. And you know, when you have a choice between living in destitution in a remote village and getting all kinds of success, social respect, interesting life, adventure, intellectual stimulation, massive income, you are walking like crazy.
Thanks for the talk. I have two related questions. First, if ideology is no longer the main force driving the regime, what do ordinary people actually want? What do we know about how they imagine society and the kind of life they hope to live? And the second question, how stable is the system over the long run? The Soviet Union managed to sustain tight controls and isolation for decades, but it still eventually collapsed. Even in North Korea, some people have access to outside information and may share it with others. Do you see any weak spots in the system, possible cracks, tensions, or forms of resistance that could grow more important over time?
What you said is exactly what I used to believe. If you look, I kept saying, used to say, a long time ago, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, that in order to change North Korea, either by bringing regime down or pushing it to change, we had to dramatically increase the influx of information inside North Korea. I have been writing about it. I even once got published in the Foreign Affairs, the Foreign Affairs, on this topic. Now I'm a bit more skeptical. I still believe that it's still the way of change, but I don't see any appetite for these changes in Washington or Seoul, let alone other places. But also talking about it, what was different with the Soviet Union? I'm old enough to remember, and back then in the perestroika, I was an activist, much involved with all this stuff. And what was important in the Soviet Union, people who were I would say instrumental. They were not common people. A significant part of common people were supportive, at least for a while. Most of them were later disappointed about the outcome. And this is what made the current rise of Putin possible. Having said that, the major change was the Russian intellectuals and party officials in the opposite order. In broader, officials and intellectuals who had enough of the Soviet system, who believed that it should be changed, and they took the lead. It was a revolution of elite, like nearly all revolutions, not all, but nearly all revolutions. And as I have said, North Korean elite is united by the fear of collapse. And they are probably right. They probably never have, well, some of them did, some of them are very smart, well-educated, but most of them have never heard about Benjamin Franklin. But they feel his maxim. Gentlemen, we have to hang together, otherwise we'll be surely hanged separately. Sorry, my English may be misquoted slightly. So these people are united. Talking about information, I believed, pretty much what you said, that it is a course of time the access will increase. And indeed it was the case between, say, 1985 and 2015. Over the last 10 years, we see a reversal, a massive reversal. Border with China, which was near open, is closed now. In 2010, 2,700 North Koreans arrived to South Korea. Now about 200. Actually, tenfold decrease. Why? Border is controlled. Access to the smuggled South Korean movies is going down. And so on and so on. I even would like it to be very skeptical in other regards. Because in the days of Arab Spring, I was slightly skeptical, seriously skeptical even, but I shared many of these illusions myself. We believed that internet communication is a massive, provider of freedom and liberal democracy. Now I can tell you it's a massive assistant of any operative in the political police. This machine is reporting where I am. If I remember correctly, maybe you'll correct me, 10 to 15 times a second. With a bit of manipulation, it can record pretty much everything I say. Even worse, big data, combined with face recognition. And North Korea has a lot of cameras. You can basically check the location. Sorry, I'm not aware of the right technical terms. Sorry, I will use some kind of bad translation from Russian or common sense rubbish. but you probably understand. You basically can have this location data. You can easily analyze, plus OCR, not OCR, it's optical recognition, facial recognition. You have basically you have somebody suspicious, then you trace his or her whereabouts for a few years back in the time. You see strange patterns. You see that, say, every second Tuesday, this suspicious person, his mobile, is close to, within few meters of mobile, such, and such. And bang, the budding anti-government cell is basically disclosed, they are tortured, and sent to prison to die. Yeah. Plus facial recognition. I talked to specialists about it. They said facial recognition is going to be quite efficient. Not now. North Koreans simply don't have enough computing capacity. It's very, very demanding for computers, and they don't have enough computers, but it's a question of time.
Do they have their own technology, or are they buying it from China?
They're trying to minimize their dependency of China because they're afraid of backdoors. They assume everything Chinese are giving them have backdoors. And they are more afraid for North Korean counterintelligence. Number one enemy is not CIA. And even not NIS. China. Having said that, so I'm sorry. If you are right, I'm not saying you are wrong. I don't know. I used to believe it. Now I changed my mind. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe you are right. We'll see. But unfortunately, right now, I completely disagree with what you say.
Hey, thank you so much for this talk. I have a related question. Not so much about ideology, but about perception. How much does North Korea actually care about how it is seen by the outside world, by foreign governments, but also by ordinary foreigners? And in that context, how should we understand the recent revival of tourism to North Korea?
How are they care? It depends on periods and individuals. There were times when they were really trying to promote themselves, sometimes with the destructive results. Because the current bad image of North Korea in the Russian popular psyche is largely a result of their self-promotion propaganda campaigns of the 1960s and 70s, when the Soviet Union was flooded with glossy, North Korean propaganda materials, with comically broken Russian language published on glossy paper with nonsense content. In some cases, they don't care. My impression is that Kim Jong-un wanted to be loved when he was young and enthusiastic. Now he probably doesn't care much. Maybe this girl, known as Kim Joo-ae, once again, we don't know his real name. Let's call her Kim Joo-ae. This girl, probably, especially when she is young and sensitive, she probably will try to promote. Not much now. What I see, they could be far more efficient in self-promotion. They could spend much more time to supporting groups which are basically trying to promote, trying to protect them, who are basically parroting their propaganda. And such group exists. They are small, but they exist. You know, what's the gag here? Dermot Hansen in London. There are people. And have I been in North Korea, I would basically pay for their tickets, I would show them around, I would show them all carefully staged performances, and they would come back and they perfect, not like my heavy accent in English, and the real English would be talking how wonderful life is. They are not doing it. They are not really supporting their admirers, which exist in small land. Had they asked me, I would name some names. Well, all these people hate me, but I don't care. I like chess, including political chess. Well, I don't like normal chess. I like political chess only. It's what would be an interesting move, but they're not doing it. So my idea is that right now they are not interested, but they might change. There have been periods when they did care. Talking about tourism. Tourism is much ado about nothing. Much ado about nothing. What happened? In January, February 2020, with the outbreak of COVID, they interrupted all tourist exchanges. And over recent 1.5 years, give or take, we have to check, I believe 1.5 years, they began to accept tourists who are citizens of Russia or Belarus. Dual citizenship doesn't matter. You can have American passport, but as long as you have the Russian passport or Belarusian passport, you can go. However, it was not a massive success. I think they are losing money on these operations, or at least not making much money, because the Russians don't want to go to North Korea. The actual numbers are very small. Actually, I did predictions for the last year, 10 to 15,000. I was wrong. It was less than 10,000.
It's Chinese tourists.
And Chinese tourists is funny. Chinese tourists are bad.
Really?
Yes. And you can read these reports about Kalmar Resort, which is built for the Russians. What a nonsense. It was not built for the Russians because they, at any given moment, 15,000 people can be housed in Kalmar Resort. It was built for the Chinese.
Because 10 years ago, there were lots of Chinese tourists.
Absolutely. 300,000 to 400,000 visits per year. Of
They
whom
made money.
95% were Chinese. They had 300,000 to 400,000 visitors per year until almost, well, not COVID, until 2017 when it went down, of whom 95% were Chinese. And when they initiated the Kalmar program, it was around 2015, they did it with the only market which makes economic sense. That is China outbound tourist market. And they are not getting Chinese. By the way, don't be misled. Very soon, 1.5 months, you will see reports about foreigners in Pyongyang, and you will say, wow, maybe things change, or maybe this Lankov was talking nonsense, everybody can go. Once a year, on the 15th of April, they have a marathon. Yes. And technically marathon is a very special event. And this is the only day when people who are not lucky to be proud citizens of the Russian Federation can go there as tourists. So there will be some visits and reports in mid-April. They will surface on the internet in early May, but it will not herald any change of policy. So even though Chinese ambassador at least twice went public, hinting that it's time openly, that it's time to open country to the Chinese tourists. And economy-wise, it makes sense. But as I have said, they like, especially now with the Russian shells money, they like to show Chinese their proper place.
So, but what is the reason for them to keep the Chinese?
I just said, I see only one reason. They want to show these nasty neighbors their proper place. They want to remind them that they are proud and independent and far superior to this materialistic and senseless Chinese who are noisy, unruly, don't know the order, forgot the ideology, don't know how to control their own people, and think way too much about themselves.
Thank you very much for the talk. It was really insightful. Returning to your earlier point that North Korea's isolation may be sustainable, what do you see as long-term unintended consequences of this self-isolation?
Isolation? Well, first of all, when I said they are stable, another part of the story, they are poor. Because they cannot trade. Because even when they are ready to increase economic interaction with the world, which is impossible because of the sanctions regime, but even then they are basically would like to do it, they still have a great deal of restrictions because survival is more important than economic success. So even when they do exchanges, they make sure that the common people don't talk much. Like, there were periods when it was possible to invest into North Korea. And they did talk to people who did investment. They did investment, but they could not visit the factories they invested in. They could occasionally drop in, and it had to be arranged, but they could not have a permanent presence. Management was a nightmare. But from the North Korean point of view, it was more important to ensure that these factories would not become channels for the undesirable political influences than to increase profits. And you know what? They are right. Because it's nice to be rich, but first you have to be alive to be rich. And this is a major problem. Even the top elite will have sort of... I talk to the North Korean elite. I like these people. They're smart and they know a lot about the world, but not everything. Even the best educated North Koreans have some yawning gaps in their understanding of the world. Something which is very difficult to explain them. These people remain largely, not to a large extent, ignorant. There will be problems with acquisition of modern technologies. There will be great problem with management, even of potentially profitable enterprises and so on. Yeah.
I think this last point is really important. I remember 12 years ago when we were traveling from Pyongyang to Kaesong in the south, and then once we exit Pyongyang, where life is pretty kind of nice actually, trees and cars, and the country becomes dirt poor. I mean, some of the villages we went through by bus, they look like China in the 1950s.
I would say even more. It's exactly when I'm going this way, and I have traveled it many, many times. I have an impression that I'm in Tang Dynasty. I had an impression that I had a time machine ride to China under Tang Dynasty. Nothing betrays that it's the 20th or the 21st century. No power supply line, no antenna, no outside the road. All transportation is ox cart. Ox cart.
Yeah, it was like, it's kind of, it was really impressive. And you don't see a single car. There's this 2-line highway, not a single car. And then the villages, not a single car. People have bicycles, but mostly they push the bicycles, or they have ox carts with wooden wheels.
It's exactly in Tang era. Such ox carts would be probably quite good in under Song Dynasty.
Yes.
It was high tech, 1,000 years old.
So the villages, they really look like, when you go back in time, it's a time machine. And this is something which people sometimes in these discussions that we just had forget, which we also have to keep in mind. I think we are already over time, and you have to leave because we have another talk tonight in London. But this was so interesting. So thank you very much, Andrei Lankov, for this. And we wish you all the best for your future travels here in the UK. And,
thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Спится дремлется